Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of us tuning in from the West Coast. Welcome to the Fall Boston University School of Medicine Dean's Advisory Board. I hope you and your families are staying safe and well. Thank you all for joining us today and for your continued commitment to BUSM. And before we get started, I'd also like to announce the date of our spring events. The Kiefer Society dinner is planned for Thursday, April 29th, 2021. Followed the next morning by the spring DAB meeting on Friday, April 30th from 8:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. Please be sure to mark your calendars, and we'll be in touch with more information in the coming months. And it is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Karen Antman, Boston University Medical Campus Provost and School of Medicine Dean, and she will provide us with a school update.
So hopefully you should be able to see my screen. Is it up?
Yes, it is, Karen.
Yes, we can see it.
Great, okay. So you remember the curve looked like this with a peak in Massachusetts being in May. It's on its way up again, no, not a surprise, but you can see the various time points that we'll be touching on: match day, MDs graduate, PhDs graduate, anti-racism demonstrations, our new classes, and we'll spend more time on those for both the MDs and GMS. We did put out a midsummer communication. I hope that you saw it, The Heroes Among Us. Pediatricians cared for seniors. We actually sent all of our children over to children's hospitals so that we would have more beds for COVID patients. Orthopedic surgeons didn't have elective joint surgery to do, so they were taking care of screening, and the deans were out in the parking lot screening student patients too. Providers lived in their basements or dorms to avoid infecting their families. And I think that some of those stories are quite touching, and also we had some stories about some of our alums at some of your institutions. We have 268 COVID publications by August 24th. I'll get the total September numbers probably within the next couple of days. You can see we had 8 New England Journal papers, 4 in radiology. I guess a lot of it was imaging, 4 in JAMA. You can see the various numbers of publications here. Lancet were 2 and +1. So here are just 4 of the New England Journal papers. There were 8 in total. One of our primary care doctors, who actually takes care of patients at Healthcare for the Homeless, talked about health equity in the New England Journal. We did some risk stratification, an assistant professor of medicine. Notice that both of these 2 were assistant professors, all 3 of them. Emergency medicine, Emily Cleveland did inequity in crisis standards of care. That became really clear as we were putting them up for consideration, that if you had pre-existing conditions, as many of our populations did, you didn't get access to respirators and that sort of thing. So actually Massachusetts, with the leadership of our faculty, put through some changes in the crisis standards of care that would make this more equitable. And then Rafael Ortega and some of the faculty put out a nice video on personal protective equipment that was downloaded thousands of times. Our emerging infectious disease laboratory pivoted immediately from Ebola to coronavirus. They have some Ebola again now, but this is Dr. Davies, and you're going to hear from him later, so I won't spend too much time on his situation now. The state actually let us continue construction on our neuroimaging center, which is now open. It has this imaging for humans. It's state of the art. It's kind of like next year's model, not even this year's model. And the animal imaging facility is a Brooker, and it's in the same location. And so this is all research MRIs done with a $5 million Mass Life Sciences grant, and we put in matching funds. Our MDs, if you remember, graduated a month early, but that's not the point of this slide. This one is that we now have back the graduation debt. And you can see that our debt actually went down for the last 3 years. So we're managing to keep that steady. We've done that by increasing this year by our student aid by about $3 million to a total of about $7 million. So that actually was a substantial increase in order to have this class graduate with reasonable debt. This was a poorer class. It's very interesting how the classes differ amongst the various amounts that they can afford to pay. And this was a noticeably poor class, so it took a lot more financial aid to have them graduate with reasonable debt. In the middle of the summer, we, like everyone else, had black coats for white coats for Black Lives demonstrations, and our Black students they participated, and after several weeks had complaints of emotional fatigue. And discussing this with the deans around the country, that was actually a major issue for medical students. How do you keep up? How do you concentrate on your medical studies, which didn't stop, while spending time and emotional time on the demonstrations? Our psychiatry department, that is chaired actually by a Black psychiatrist, was very helpful. He's recruited 8 African-American faculty, so they were very helpful in supporting our students over the summer. The Medical Education Committee, note the date on this, this was last year, actually commissioned a medical education committee with students and faculty to assess systemic racism on the campus, in our climate, and in the curriculum. This was a year ago. The timing was just unbelievable because the report came in on June 12th, right in the middle of all of the demonstrations. The report was submitted. We didn't waste any time. We had multiple discussions through the Medical Education Committee, and then we sent it out to the chairs in the departments. And many of the recommendations have already been implemented, and some are obviously underway. I can go into that in more detail. I'd be happy to send you the report if you're interested. Interestingly enough, because of that timing, our Dean of Medical Education and one of our medical students who was active on this committee are actually presenting in a plenary presentation at the November AAMC, American Association of Medical Colleges meeting. So it is a way of getting some recognition for having had this committee out and ready to go at a very important time. You remember that about the same time the university was recruiting Dr. Ibram Kendi, we actually recruited his wife as our division chief for pediatric emergency medicine. And she's starting this fall as well. So we have both Kendis. Just to review a little bit the management stages, many of you have heard about our emergency responses in March and April. We then had the rebound May to July. We're in the kind of rebuilding segment, and I'll go into that a little bit more. And then hopefully, if we get our vaccines and people become safe again, we can do some reimagining early next spring. How much of our hybrid classes do we want to continue? Some of them work very well. Telemedicine, I believe, is here to stay in some situations. And I think that there's a consensus, I hope, around the country that we need new healthcare policies to manage populations that are underserved in medicine and bear the brunt of pandemics. I wanted to show you that we're not the only people who are concerned, that our concerns are shared by other deans. For me, over the summer and now, it's keeping us all as safe as possible. But you can see that financial sustainability of the school or the academic medical center was by far the biggest concern of American deans. Disruption to the clinical curriculum, a real problem. especially trying to get students to finish up before graduation. We have front loaded our curriculum so that if we have to go into, if the students have to come out of the clinics again, that hopefully they'll have their rotations done and can still graduate. Healthcare disparities in population health was third. Mental health, we already touched on that. That's a major problem. And then getting the research enterprise back up again, transition to residency. You can see the various concerns of deans, and particularly the differential impact for women and faculty and staff of color. Also the issues of parents with young children, and that's still a concern. We now have adequate PPE for faculty, staff, and students. In fact, we have a PPE store on campus where we kind of stocked up just in case we have an issue, and everybody can, we put in all our orders in bulk, big bulk orders, so that we were more likely to get it. Students went back into the clinic. We got our M4s back, our fourth year students and our senior PAs back in June. Our third year students went in late August. And the mid-level PAs, our new class arrived. I'll say more about them on August 1st. The student residence, which was only half full last spring, now has only 3 open beds, and we're fine with that because if we have to isolate somebody, we have some place to put them. The academic functions continued. We continue to have faculty appointments and promotions. The committee's been meeting by Zoom, and actually more people come to the committees. We've had our committees, our retreats, planning, research and education planning, town meetings with the faculty, students, and staff. And the admission cycles went on, and you'll see that it's actually kind of interesting. We had our usual almost 10,000 applications. We interviewed the usual 1,000, and all that happened before COVID. We accepted just under 500 students. So you had about if you applied last year, you had about a 5% chance of getting in. We matriculated a smaller class, as we told you about last spring, that was by plan. And I'm kind of glad we did, because we do have issues with clinical slots right now. The yield was 34%, which is quite good. This is the GPAs and MedCats of the classes. You can see that over the last 10 years, the proportion of students with lower GPAs and MedCat scores has diminished over time. Nice trend there. And the proportion of students with very high MedCats and GPAs has increased and then stabilized off. That's the green group, but certainly we didn't lose academic preparation because of COVID. I think at least you can say that from the slide. This is our race and ethnicity over the last decade, and you can see our class coming in with 22% underrepresented minorities. African Americans in blue, Latinos in red, and then Asians in green. You will notice that somewhere around 2011, we became majority minority and within the medical students of the medical school. We had put in testing starting July 27th. That's 3 days before our MD students came back, and we were doing staffs and teachers first. And then students, it's now running very smoothly. The students and the faculty that are on campus are all getting tested twice a week. We have picked up 2 research clusters, interestingly, but no real clusters amongst the students. That's good. We have the rebound. Actually, applications for the MD program this coming fall are already up 24%. They're up 17% nationally, but they're actually up almost 25% for MD class next year. So people want to be physicians. That's not an issue. We opened up the cafeteria. It's grab and go. You can't sit and eat. We put out more outdoor tables so people can eat. And then our master's and PhD students arrived on September 3rd. This is the students registered. This is very important for financial stability. We were watching this up until about last week. It's the numbers of students registered, but then how many settled and paid their tuition, because certainly they could have registered and then decided not to come. You can see that we went down on our MD students by 40 students, which was fine, that was planned, but we went up on our master students by 50. And as of last week, we were up on tuition over last year, and therefore the university is now not watching us quite so carefully financially. They certainly have more issues for them because basically they have more international students. But because our research funding is above last year's and our tuition income is above last year's, I think we're going to be fine. And you can see that we decreased our budget in preparation for this. You can see the actual finances for 2020, that's the academic year. The 2021 budget year, which is currently what we're in, we actually decreased our budget because we're concerned that we may need to be covering other expenses. But you can see that with the income coming in that I think we're going to be fine. So the NIH continues to support our researchers. We lost rent in the spring, but we're now essentially full. We expect a lot more student needs, so we're gearing up for that. That's one of the reasons to be conservative with the budget. PPE cleaning and COVID testing is expensive. Just COVID testing is probably about $1 million. So I think we're going to be fine. So any questions? Anything in the chat box?
Yes, Karen. Oh, it's what was the average financial aid given to students since they needed more financial aid?
I know that we took the normal amount that we had given them and added 3 million more just before graduation because we basically, they were coming in way too over, but I don't know what they actually, I can get the answer to that question, what the average was. The most that you could get is about 35,000 on a tuition of 60,000. So you could almost get half if you were needy, sufficiently needy. And that's substantially more. I mean, I remember 15 years ago, the biggest scholarships we had were 5,000. So the ability to give $30,000 in tuition scholarship is something that we thank all of you for your support. Many of you have contributed. Other questions?
Yes, can you hear me, Karen?
Yes.
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 First of all, thank you very much for that report. A lot of information and a lot of things going on there under these unusual circumstances. First, I would love to have a copy of that report on systemic racism. I would be very interested in that because, as you know, it's been remarkable around the country. This pandemic has shown in stark detail how the inequities in the healthcare system are really there, that all of us have been talking about for so many years, but never got the attention that this virus has really brought to it. So I would love to have a copy of that.
You can, we will be happy to send all of you a copy and you can read it if you want to. You can hit delete if you don't. Corey, will you make a note of that? But I'm just absolutely amazed that our students and our medical education committee actually a year ago were already talking about this and had started working on this subject so that it was ready to go. And I think that they're getting a lot of really nice exposure nationally in the community of medical educators because of that. I really like that they're getting to take a leadership role.
Great.
I see Harold, Hal Heifetz, you've got your hand up. You probably are on mute though.
Karen, I have another question.
Go ahead, Lou, while he's figuring out unmuting.
Yes, I didn't see the data on the number of Black students in the incoming class. Could you tell me again what that is this year? Because that has been an issue, as you know, over the years.
Well, Dr. Heifetz can be looking, and I will pull the slides up again because I did shut them down so I could see you. And meanwhile, Hal, you want to ask your question, and then I'll get back to Lou on the answer to his question. You're still on mute.
Hal, you're still on mute. You could always enter your question in the chat. Oh, there you go. You're unmuted now.
I was questioning what Bob Stern is doing in terms of the Alzheimer projects.
Bob Stern, as usual, is continuing to do substantial research on many different sports teams. The Alzheimer's disease grant just went in again for its 5-year renewal, and I'll keep you posted on that. For Lou Sullivan's question, there were 9 Black students and 26 Latinx students, and 1 Native American that came into the class, and 58 Asians. And the most we've had recently for Black students was 14. Last year we had 5. This year we had 9. It does bounce around. A lot depends on how many people are coming in through the EMSSP program.
Thank you. Comment also, I was pleased that the Rebecca Lee tombstone has been placed. That's gotten a lot of attention around the country. I happen to be part of a working group down at the National Academy of Medicine, and that was noted among the members of that group because we are very much looking at Blacks and other minorities in medicine strategies to increase. So I think that's a great thing that was done for Rebecca Lee.
Well, you probably know that we contributed to that because we thought that that would be important. We are now collecting for a scholarship, and I believe that Suzanne will report on that during her report.
I will. Suzanne Butler.
Yes, Karen, in the light of your experience over the last several months and the beginning of the semester, the conditions in Boston, what are the 2 or 3 things that most concern you looking out over the next year?
I'm concerned that we're going to have problems with keeping our students in the clinic. The hospitals are having problems with social distancing, and therefore there just isn't enough space in the rooms where people do charting and have meetings for residents, attendings, and medical students. And therefore we've had to come up with extra spaces for the medical students to write up their notes so that they're not sitting in the spaces. For those of you who went to medical school, you know how crowded those conditions can be, and that's just not safe. So that's why we're front loading their curriculum. We've got them in the clinics, and boy, are we front loading their curriculum right now so that we can get as many of their rotations in before we have another problem. We are hoping to keep them in. That's why we got all that PPE. The reason to take them out was we didn't have enough PPE to keep them safe, and we didn't want to take it away from the nurses and the doctors who actually were taking care of the patients. But we've got the storage room full of PPE at this point, and we're hoping to just get our students. You cannot teach a doctor how to be a doctor without having them see patients. And so we want to keep those students in the clinic. So that's my #1 priority. The research people are doing great. We've got them about 60% dense, but that's fine. They take turns going in to do their research. And I think that we're getting, they come home to write up their papers and that sort of thing, which is fine. We don't want people there who don't need to be there. And then we've got the Learn from Anywhere curriculum where we've got faculty in the classroom. We've got students. We've de-densified again, so we can't have 150 students in the class. They have to kind of take turns again. But we do have it online, so it's complicated for the faculty, but the faculty seem to be doing okay. They talk to the people who are watching, and they talk to the people who are in the class. It's complicated, but the technology works. Maybe this is really good, actually.
I suspect a lot of things will stay.
We're keeping the students from having parties. I do. The one thing that really terrifies me is that if we have an outbreak, we have to send all the students home. Then how do we continue their medical education? We can do classrooms from home, but we cannot do the clinical part. You know that there was an outbreak at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. There was an outbreak in Springfield. We do not want an outbreak on our medical campus. So the students can't have parties. But they do. Shamim?
Karen, are these all the clinical rotations the students do other on EMR, or do they have to write the notes? If they are on EMR, they can take their computer and spread out and write their notes.
That is the exact, we basically are using some of our bigger spaces we never had to have spaces for our 3rd and 4th year students because they were in the hospital. We now have classroom spaces, just basically really spread out for the students to write their EMR notes, just as you suggest, because we want to decompress the hospital so that nothing happens over there. You're absolutely right. They finish up their rounds and they come over and they write up their notes, and then they go back and see their patients and come over and write up their notes. Fortunately, you know, the weather's great and they can just cross the quad, at least for now. Trying to find a place for them to eat. You know, that's why we put the more tables out on the green. It's safer out there to take your mask off. The library is giving out straws, by the way, because you can't study for 4 hours without some drinks. You know, who thinks about this stuff? They're paper.
Oh, I'm sorry, Karen, go ahead.
The straws are paper. We're not going to mess with the environment.
Perhaps we should move on. People can always ask questions afterwards. Lee, do you think? You're keeping us on track.
Thank you, Dr. Anman. Suzanne Mazzelli, Associate Dean for Development, will now provide a development and fundraising update.
Thank you. Great to see all of you. Thank you for joining us today. My update will extend back about 12 months. That was the last time I had the chance to share the development report with you. This is a look at our cash in giving from fiscal year to fiscal year, extending back 10 years. And you can see that our numbers have pretty much steadily increased. This chart actually breaks out capital investments in blue, current use dollars in orange, and endowment investments in gray. We did have a spike year in 2016, thanks to a couple of significantly large gifts. And this past year, this past fiscal year, unfortunately saw a bit of a dip. And that was due, of course, to the COVID pandemic, which shut down our labs for the last quarter of the fiscal year, which meant a pause on organization, corporation, and foundation support. We are very happy to see $9 million in 2021. That's a significant increase over this time last year. And I think that it bodes well for this upcoming fiscal year, as the Dean already indicated. Unfortunately, the pictures are cutting into my slide. I don't quite know what to do about that. Whoops, I don't know if anyone has any advice either.
We can see them.
Yeah, but I can't. So let me see if I can now figure out how to go back. Whoops, I'm really sorry. This is not, let me just take 1 minute to go back. My apologies.
I don't know how you can do it with showing, you really do have to just put it up as normal looking at the slide and then blow up the slide.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, I can't see that one column, but I'll try to remember it. Oh, I did it again. Thank you all for bearing with me.
Suzanne, usually if you go up to your display, it'll give you a side-by-side option, which will allow your thumbnails to stay to the right and then your slides to stay separate from the pictures.
All right, well, I'm just going to barge along here, and I think I'll be able to make the most of it. So this is a look at the revenue by source. Okay, never mind. Yeah, I'm really sorry. I do want to go back for a second. Okay, so share the screen, share. And let's see, this is where I wanted to be. So this is a look at where our funds are coming from by source over the course of the past fiscal years. And you can see, as usual, that most of our revenue is from corporations, foundations, and associations. And this is primarily for our research endeavors. And then we are so grateful to our individuals who support us across the board. So foundation giving highlights, we'd really like to highlight Rhoda O's support for our brain health research, an anonymous foundation supporting Drs. Ann McKee and Bob Stern's CTE research. I'd especially like to give a shout out to the Vertex Foundation and thank Dr. Kewal Ramani for helping us support our pipelines for underrepresented minority students, along with her own support for our scholarship endeavors. And this is our campaign scholarship gift pyramid. As usual, we are really focusing on raising endowed scholarship support. And over the past 10 years, we saw $36 million in endowed scholarship come in. Our goal is $80 million, and that would actually, along with BU institutional loans, allow us to be need lined for our students. They would be able to receive scholarship support and loan support from BU without having to go to outside sources. And we do have a couple of significant gift conversations going on. So we're hoping to take a stab at those top level boxes. So I definitely want to talk about the Rebecca Lee Crumpler Scholarship Initiative. We are so excited to be able to recognize the first Black American woman to earn a medical degree in the United States, awarded by the New England Female Medical College, which became the BU School of Medicine. I would like to give a special thanks to Drs. Sullivan, Williams, and Bottomley for helping us to establish this fund. We've received almost $40,000, and our goal is to endow the fund by the end of the calendar year with a $100,000. And by our 175th anniversary in 2023, we're hoping to announce a significant commitment of between $5 and $10 million combined for the Rebecca Lee Crumpler Scholarship, which will allow us to bring many more young Black women into the medical profession. So once again, thank you to those who have already donated, and we look forward to more to come with this exciting initiative. We're also very focused on support for the COVID-19 work going on in the National Emerging Infectious Disease Lab. You can see at the bottom of this slide our donations to date from individual donors, close to $84,000, and over $1.2 million in grants from foundations. There will be an appeal going out broadly across the BU community shortly, and you will be hearing from Dr. Davey with more about the research work going on in the needle. We're very grateful to parents Albert and Debbie Rosenthaler for donating over $800,000 to renovate and modernize the Gross Anatomy Lab, both the infrastructure and our teaching tools with state-of-the-art anomatage tables, the ultrasound machines you see in the picture, replacing the HVAC systems, and more. And this is all especially significant right now, given the fact that our students need to go through the Gross Anatomy Lab, and we need to make sure that it's a safe and healthy environment for them to do so. So we're very grateful to the Rosenthalers for that. And here's the team. I think you may know all of us. Maura, Regina, and I work with individuals. David, Catherine, and Catherine work with foundations. Nick, Corey, and Lindsay do their work across the board. And I would also like to thank, this was a slide that I was trying to get back to. I'd like to thank Dr. Chris Hunter for establishing 2 new scholarships, one for the School of Public Health and the other for the School of Medicine. I'd also like to thank Maurice Ferre for continuing to support the Maurice Family Scholarship Fund. And I'd like to give a shout out to all of you for all of your significant contributions. We're extremely grateful.
Thank you, Suzanne. Any questions for Suzanne?
The virtual anatomy table arrived this morning, by the way. So the students are, it's in a room where they can socially distance. And if you've ever seen any of these, it's huge, and it has a computerized cadaver, and you can do all sorts of teaching on it. So especially with social distancing, this will be, and it's right next to the anatomy lab, so they can go from the anatomy lab over to the anatomized taser. Those of you who remember the formaldehyde during your dissections, this is really going to go a long way towards putting in some HVAC so that it will be much more pleasant dissecting in the future once we have this, this renovation complete. So we're really excited about it for those, especially those two reasons. The doctors in the room are smiling. I can, everybody remembers smelling like formaldehyde for months.
Perhaps we'll move on then. With the COVID-19 pandemic, it's resulted in a number of changes to life on the BUSM campus. And today we're joined by Dr. Priya Garg, Associate Dean of Medical Education, and Deborah Stearns-Kurosawa, Associate Provost of the Medical Campus and Associate Dean ad interim of the Division of Graduate Medical Sciences. They're here to speak about curriculum and enrollment changes caused by the pandemic for the MD and Graduate Medical Sciences program. And we'll take questions for them after their presentation.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having us. I thought I would share with you what we have been doing over the last several months in our response to the pandemic. I'll share a little bit about some national data and then go into what we've been doing at BUSM. So what I want to begin with was just providing you a general overview to what nationally medical schools have done and thinking about the COVID response. So from March until about late August, every medical school filled out a survey where we described how we were approaching the pandemic in all different areas, including medical education, student affairs, faculty. This graph you're looking at is the response to the question of, have you suspended face-to-face clinical programs? What you can see is that in April, about 94% of fourth-year medical students were no longer clinically seeing patients. The blue line is third-year medical students, and the red line is first and second-year medical students. And then over time, you will see that in August, about 38% of medical schools had suspended programs, but the majority had come back online for clinical programs. And this is a very similar trajectory to what we had. But when people ask me what's the largest impact that we have faced in medical education, and it's particularly for our students, it's been the change in the amount of clinical exposure that they've had during this period because of the suspension. And a lot of our focus was, how do we continue to progress our students with their clinical skills in the face of having to suspend their in-person clinical activities. On the right is just a graph showing you the regional data, and the Northeast was very collaborative during this time, which I'll share, but we were particularly conservative compared to other regions. And so you'll see that at this time, even in the Northeast, that 60% of schools had started, but 40% are still suspended compared to the Central and Western regions. So in terms of our timeline of events, all of our classes, all 4 years, were transitioned to a virtual and remote curriculum in March because of the pandemic. But as I spoke about in the last slide, our goal was to make sure that every class progressed through the curriculum, graduated on time, and was able to transition to the next year despite what we were facing. So we created new courses, new curricula, new credit experiences so that could happen. The first that we created was in March. Over the period of about 3 weeks, we created a new transition to internship course that all of our fourth years who were graduating took in March, so that they were prepared with the skills, that they understood COVID, what it was, what they were going to face as interns, but as well as we're able to add new skills that we weren't able to fit into the curriculum in the past. In April, per the governor's request, we graduated our 4th year class 1 month early. All of our students had met their requirements. There were some electives that they weren't able to take or didn't take, but all of them had met the competencies, and we reviewed every single student's transcript one by one to ensure that. Unfortunately, GME wasn't quite ready for that transition, and so there were less than 10 students that were actually able to start internship early. In April, our new 4th years we're getting ready to start clinically, but couldn't enter the hospitals. So we also created a new transition to 4th year course, a course that was really focused on sub-internship skills of thinking like a 4th year, and preparing them from that transition from the clerkship. And that was a new course that all of our educators created. In May, we actually flipped the design of our clerkships. So traditionally, we start our clerkships in May. We start with an orientation, and then they begin clinically, and we embed all of their didactic experiences and their lectures within the clerkships. Instead, we flipped it and gave them all of their didactic and core knowledge at the beginning in 2-week intervals by each clerkship so that we could delay the clinical entry. And then they are now in the clinical phase where all they're doing is clinical care, and they don't have the didactics in between. In June, we started our 4th years clinically on all of their rotations. All of our affiliates and sites were really excited to have our students back. We didn't have any issues bringing them back into the clinical environment. We had the appropriate PPE. We actually send a survey every week where we monitor PPE, and we haven't had any issues. And then in June, we also had another exciting time for us. As all of you know, racism has been an area that's being discussed across the country, but particularly in medicine, and how we've dealt with anti-racism across medical education. Our school noticed this gap about a year ago, and we actually had started with a task force a year to June 2020, and were able to publish and release our own report on racism in medicine at BUSM. It was a 136-page report written by students and faculty, and we're able to release that to the community, and it's available on our website for anyone to see. And then in July, we began our 2nd years. We actually began in the Learn for Anywhere hybrid curriculum that BU has, but we kept our students remote in terms of not allowing them to see clinical patients until August, but we're bringing them back into the classroom. And then in August, we started our new class who has had the choice whether they want to be in the classroom or whether they want to be in person. We limit the classrooms to social distancing numbers, so our auditorium only allow for 39 people. We created a new application that allows our students to go online and say whether they want to be in the classroom or not, and we fairly distribute it over 2-week periods. And then now all of our students are actually in clinical experiences across the 4 years. Some of the innovations I want to share briefly, because we wanted to continue the clinical experiences and communication skills as such a core component of our curriculum, we collaborated with the College of Fine Arts. We have been over the last year. We have a fellow who actually works with us, and we changed all of our in-person communication during the March, April, May, June periods into virtual experiences with actors, where students, instead of getting to interview real patients, they started interviewing actors over Zoom, and were able to still practice some of the difficult skills that we try to teach them. We changed our clinical assessments, which we do usually with sterilized patients in person every spring. We turned them all over Zoom. It actually was really well received by the students. We were able to assess all of the things except for the physical exam. And so that was a really positive way for us to continue our students' assessments. We've changed anatomy to a prosection based course. So what that means is typically we used to have dissection where the students started dissecting the human body all the way from the skin inwards. And it was an important process because it's one, it feels like a rite of passage for the students, but also there's a lot ethically that we teach them about the donor process. We wanted to continue that, but because in dissection you have to have your face for many hours next to a colleague, we decided to move to prosection where the body has been dissected already. And when you come in, you're able to be hands-on, still able to see all of the anatomy. You're still able to see the variations in different bodies in the room, but we only keep the students in there in full PPE for 2 hours. And then we have application using different types of technology and small group learning. Because of the pandemic, our students couldn't take their licensing exams. They weren't able to get into licensing centers. So the Northeast actually collaborated regionally. We were the only region, or the first region, I should say, to deliver the USMLE in our schools. So we collaborated. Brown held the testing site. We were able to send all of our students. About 100 of our students were able to use the site. And then we transitioned and gave the site on site here at BU. And just completed that, both step 1 and step 2. So we were able to get all of our students through the exam, and everyone has been able to take it who wanted to. And then lastly, what we're in the process of with student affairs is we're using our actors to prepare our students for the residency interviews. So they're practicing before they start the virtual residency interview process using the same College of Fine Art actors. Just briefly, what is Learn from Anywhere? So at Charles River and in the main campus, students have the choice whether they want to be in the class or remote. That's true for us for all of our science and knowledge classes, but for the clinical skills, we require our students to come in for doctoring because you need to be hands-on to progress in the curriculum. So we've really spent a lot of time with the medical advisory group at Charles River developing PPE protocols. Our students wear the same PPE when they're in doctoring or anatomy or small group learning that we wear in the outpatient settings as clinicians. So they're wearing surgical masks, they're wearing gloves, they're wearing face shields. They're wearing gowns when they're touching each other. And just to give you a snapshot to end with, this is the same dashboard I showed you in the beginning, but what you'll see is that is very similar to what's happening nationally. This is out of 108 schools that were reporting recently, but many schools are using PPE for physical exam, for anatomy lab, for simulation, less in the large group lecture halls. So I'm gonna end there, and I am happy to take questions, I think, after Dr. Stearns-Kurosawa finishes.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Hello, I have a question. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would congratulate you on so many moving parts to the curriculum that this pandemic has caused you to undertake. The one question I have is this. Did you have to coordinate any of these changes with the LCME, with the accrediting body, or did you have flexibility to make these changes without having to have that review?
So because I'm in a safe space, I'll say the LCME was quite helpful during this time. It was actually very flexible. So they held a series of webinars and actually allowed us to change the curriculum as long as we maintained the learning objectives that we had intended. And we were able to do that. And they allowed schools to move the clinical experience to later if we weren't able to fulfill it for the learning objectives. So basically what we did for the 3rd year is that the students who are in 4th year right now are finishing their clinical clerkships in the 4th year that they weren't able to do. And the LCME allowed us to do that, and all schools.
Very good, thank you. And I have a second question. Will you be evaluating the students who are taking their courses entirely remotely versus those who will have some person-to-person experience? The question is, how much value added is there in the learning process from the personal interactions?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. I think that, so in terms of the assessments, we are trying to transition back our clinical assessments to in-person. We have the remote comparison. The biggest gap, I would say, is that the physical exam can't be done over Zoom. And so we haven't even tried to make that comparison. Some schools had students speak the physical exam rather than and use that as a comparison. We chose to give the students the physical exam, and really this year are going back to hands-on. I think the piece that we have found you can do over Zoom is clinical reasoning. And so we have been able to demonstrate that the students can verbally describe their clinical reasoning even without the patient in front of them.
Very good, thank you. And Dean Atman, I'd make one comment about the new environment now without the formaldehyde. Having gone through the previous environment, we regarded that as a rite of passage, being able to work in those environments. And after 2 or 3 weeks, as I remember, we really were not even aware of it. So I'm sure things are much different now, and perhaps it's better. But we really took with pride our ability to withstand the fumes from formaldehyde during my student days.
And sorry, it's Pat Williams. I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Of course.
Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
The first is, have the third and fourth year medical students have had the opportunity to practice any of the new skills required for telemedicine, given the current environment? And the second is, I remember when we did a tour of BU last year, the medical school, there were mannequins that the students could do virtual physical exams on. Has there been any thought given to increasing the number of mannequins that are interactive so that they can still have some element of physical exam skills that they can work on?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So for the telehealth piece, so 2 of our core rotations turned to telehealth experience. So geriatrics during the pandemic turned to telehealth, but actually coming back to the previous question, we still have maintained some telehealth competencies in geriatrics, which is a required 4th year clerkship. So the students do telehealth there. They do it in their ambulatory medicine. And then they're doing it intermixed throughout many of the outpatient specialties right now, because that's how the providers are also speaking to their patients. So they're getting the experience. We did the telehealth teaching and exposure during those transition courses that I spoke about. And the AAMC just released telehealth competencies that are under revision. And so we're going to be embedding those into our curriculum. So that's where the telehealth piece comes. In terms of the simulation equipment, that's an area we continue to work on. We did order new abdominal mannequins before this year started. We thought a lot about whether we wanted the students to be at home with inflatable mannequins, which many schools are doing for the physical exam, or we wanted to bring them in. We actually have our students coming in doing physical exams with each other. We have them cohorted to their roommates. And so that's what we chose to do, but we also have the mannequins. Actually, right now, all the second years are actually doing hands-on sterilized patient experiences of the GU exam right this afternoon, all in PPE. So we are still doing live in-person physical exam.
Great,
Priya,
thanks.
thank you, Dr. Williams. Priya, a question has just come in from Dr. Hunter, saying, great presentation. We appreciate all the effort it represents. Students graduating in 2021 will have had both their 3rd and 4th year clinical experiences impacted by COVID. Is there a plan to follow them longitudinally after graduation to assess the impact on their careers?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. Actually, I have this on my list to talk to Dean Ammon about, but yesterday we were invited by the ACGME to participate in a study where they want to follow students' milestones as they enter into residency, and to look at their progression of the milestones, which are the assessments used in residency. So I think we will have that opportunity to look at our graduates who were in the COVID pandemic versus the ones who came before. We do also have a graduate survey where we ask all the residency directors of our student performance, but in general, our students are usually categorized in the outstanding exceptional category. We have very few, maybe 5, less than 3 to 5 a year that there's any concern about. So that isn't that helpful, but I think that's a great thought and something we'll continue to think about, how to follow the students and research that.
We should probably move on to Dr. Stearns Kurosawa's presentation.
Well, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Debbie Stearns Kurosawa. I'm the Interim Associate Dean for Graduate Medical Sciences. This is the arm of the medical school that houses the graduate programs, so the master's and the PhD programs. So I think one thing that distinguishes us from the medical students is that there's a great deal of heterogeneity. We have 18 master's programs and 15 PhD programs. So in the context of COVID, there had to be a considerable amount of creativity on the part of the faculty, the staff, and the students in order to deal with the changing circumstances. And so I summarize some of that here. I think if I can move my slides, here we go. So Priya touched briefly on Boston University's Learn from Anywhere education model. So basically this is designed so that students have a choice whether they come in class on campus or whether they participate in the content, the lecture, or whatever it is, remotely. And so this could be international participation as well as from the domestic US. So in GMS, there were basically three ways that this model was adapted. So one is the hybrid in-class and remote delivery. So as you can see in the picture here, Dr. Davies, and there's a student as well in the photo, are actually in the class. And you can see on the screen up here, there's students up in the corner who are participating remotely as well too. So this is the original version of what the Learn from Anywhere model was intended to be. But because we have such heterogeneity and different needs between the programs, this was adapted in different ways as well too. So there were some lectures that were pre-recorded. Students can watch them on their own time, and then maybe the next day during an already scheduled classroom period, there would be follow-up on this. So this is similar to what's known as a flipped classroom, where the students take some responsibility for becoming knowledgeable about the content, and they come into class, and then there's translational and application questions so that it can be developed even further. Another way that the faculty dealt with this was that they would have lectures. I use Zoom here, but some of them use some other mediums as well too, although Zoom was the most frequent. So the lectures would be given remotely, and then they would supplement their curriculum with more frequent in-person small group discussions, because our classroom occupancy is very limited. So they would split the classroom up into small groups and then have a faculty member in there and just do that more frequently throughout the course of the curriculum. So those were the three basic ways that the faculty and the students dealt with the restrictions that were imposed by the pandemic. All the exams were made remote, and this was a considerable challenge for a number of the programs, because in the graduate education, most of the exams are done by essay in order to reinforce critical thinking and analytical skills. And so that's very hard to do remotely, so they had to change the format for that, and also had to introduce remote proctoring as a result of too. And in order to help the students decide whether they wanted to be in class or whether they wanted to be remote, depending on their particular circumstances, some of the large classes were divided into family groups so that they would participate in class as a group, or they would participate remotely as a group, and so they could rotate attendance either way. We also use the cohort app for the larger courses as well too, so that if the students change their mind, then the next person on the waiting list could come in and know that there would be a seat in the classroom that would be available for them. So these were the adjustments that were made in terms of the content delivery. In terms of the adjustments for the content itself, for PhD students, there wasn't a lot of it, but what happened during the peak, so this was in April and May, where the entire university pivoted to remote learning. A lot of them were in their second or third laboratory rotation. So these are required rotations for the first year PhD students. So they get to know the people in the lab, the PIs, the type of research and that sort of thing before they make a decision of where they want to go for their dissertation work. This all had to be done remotely. And so there was a focus on scholarship. They were able to participate in lab meetings remotely. A lot of them, and this is what I would do with students in my lab as well too, a lot of them participated in writing review articles. And so this allowed the PhD students to dig deep into the literature in the area of interest that they would want to pursue. They also participated in grant writing, and the qualifying exams and the oral defenses all had to be done remotely as well too. And so these all had to be adjusted. We had PhD students, one of our PhD students gave their oral defense from the Philippines successfully. And we had a couple of students who were in the CREM who gave their oral defense while they were in the middle of developing the PCR test that was ultimately used by Boston Medical Center. So what we're doing now, because students are back on campus, it was their PhD lab rotations were front loaded to earlier in the fall semester so that they could get through these. And in order to do it, the rotations were shortened, but this was agreeable to everyone. The master's clinical programs had a great deal of adjustment that they had to do in terms of their curriculum because all the clinical sites were shutting down. This was the same sort of problem that there was with the medical students. So they had to shuffle schedule modules to accommodate the availability of the rotations. A new public health course was developed, and they had to purchase some virtual learning modalities with case studies in order to meet accreditation requirements. So for enrollment adjustments, there wasn't anything for the PhD programs because the admissions process for our PhD programs had been completed by then. The master's programs, however, have rolling admissions through the summer. And so because of COVID, we planned for and anticipated a worst case scenario of a 20% reduction in enrollment. And this is part of our financial infrastructure. So we spent a lot of time on this, developed a comprehensive recruitment, retention, and a nurturing program. And this went all the way from May through September. And so we developed these different initiatives that you see here, program-specific responses to applicants who are prospective. And we can tell from where they click on the website whether they're prospective and what kind of forms they've filled, so that they could get a response specific to the program that they're interested, whether it was medical sciences or forensic anthropology. We had an intern who spent a lot of time on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And our marketing and communications specialist developed strategic email funnel approach in order to keep prospective and applicants interested in the programs. And there was also what's called a nurturing program. And this is for students who were mutual accepts. They had decided to come to GMS, but they could still change their mind. And so to keep them interested, we sent them emails and video and some created content to keep them interested in the programs. Frequently enough to keep them interested, but not so frequent as to be annoying. We also moved up our accepted students day. So this happened earlier in June rather than what was typically later in the summer, so that students could answer questions about all the things that were COVID related and the guidelines and things that were going on at the university. We had over 400 people on that call. And we put together a virtual campus tour as well too, because the students could not come to campus to see what facilities there were. So it took them around the buildings and the research facilities. And so the result of all that was that our overall enrollment in the master's program is up 21% for fall. We still have a few more days until we get final numbers for this, but so far it has not changed very much at all. So the overall applications for last year's cycle was up about 20%, and that's reflected, that's reflected in these numbers here as well too. So given the context of what the master's programs and our enrollment and admissions had to deal with, we're very pleased with this, and it will provide some stability to our program moving forward. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
We got one question from Dr. Edelstein. This is for Dr. Garg, actually. Since the students are not going on off-site electives, how will this affect their choices? And as a follow-up question, how are the Zoom interviews going to happen for med students and for residents?
So I'll try to answer the best I can, since student affairs mostly is engaging with the interview process. But in terms of the offsite electives, the best part was that that was a national decision made with a release of a statement from the AAMC and many of the national specialty organizations. So our students aren't at a disadvantage, because the recommendation across the country is that students do not travel to do away electives. And so that's been helpful for us. There have been some virtual electives that have been designed, but they're not for credit experiences. They're mostly if students just want to see what another institution looks like, but they're being discouraged. So I don't think our students are at much of a disadvantage, because we're lucky that we have every specialty here and all of our students are able to see them at BMC. The students that have really struggled with this are the smaller schools and hospital systems that don't have the specialties within their system. And so they really needed the away electives. And so we've seen that with some of our regional medical schools and have been trying to figure out ways to help them. In terms of the residency interviews, I don't have a lot of details on it, except to say that they are coming in every shape and form in terms of how many hours the day is, whether they're doing a virtual tour that the students will be on. They're in general shorter than the typical. What we've seen from the educational side is that not many students need to take away blocks or off blocks, because they're able to integrate the interviews within shorter periods of time. So I think that's a plus. The cost is much less. And the big push nationally has been for students to not sign up for 50 different, or not apply to 50 different residencies and interviews because it's a virtual experience, because the residencies are really pushing students to really apply to the schools they want to attend, and are trying to work with the residency program directors to change this dynamic where our students are applying to more and more schools and the cost is getting higher. So that's a positive, I think, coming out of the pandemic.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Garg and Dr. Stearns-Kurosawa. We'll move on to our next panel discussion, and we'll cover a topic that is highly important now more than ever: diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. It is my pleasure to introduce moderator Dr. Rafael Ortega, professor and chair of anesthesiology, Dr. Vonzella Bryant, assistant dean of student affairs, Dr. Angelique Harris, director of faculty development, and Kay Elise Green, a third-year medical student and diversity and inclusion fellow for the Early Medical School Selection Program. Our panel will discuss many of the DEI initiatives for students, faculty, and staff at BUSM, followed by plenty of time for us to ask questions and to have a discussion with the panel.
Thank you so much for the invitation, everyone. And so nice to see some of you that I have met in the past. Again, I'm Rafael Ortega. I'm the chair of the Department of Anesthesiology. I was the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion in our medical school for 8 years, until I took my current position just a couple of years ago. And having trained here at the old Boston City Hospital and University Hospital in the 1980s, I'm in my fourth decade on the faculty. And of the many roles that I've played over the years, I'm confident in saying that none has been as rewarding as having worked with diversity and inclusion in our medical school. And this is for two main reasons. First, we do critically important and necessary work. And second, the people I work with, including Dr. Anman, are entirely committed to something I very much identify with, which is educating the most heterogeneous physician workforce for our country. As you know, our medical school has an illustrious history in matters of diversity. We trained the first African-American female, Rebecca Lee Crumpler, as well as the first Native American. physician Charles Eastman, and the first African-American psychiatrist, Salomon Carter Fuller, also graduated from our medicals. And of course, the great Louis Sullivan, who is with us today, is perhaps our most distinguished alumnus of recent times. And today we will have a brief conversation about a burning topic with three remarkable African-American women, Vonsella Bryant, emergency physician, emergency medicine physician, and Kay Elise Green, medical student, and Angelique Harris, director of faculty development, and other details were already mentioned about them. In the current social and political climate where injustices and disparities in healthcare and in society at large have received scrutiny with renewed vigor, it is imperative to have candid dialogues, conversations about the challenges, but also the successes of women like our panelists today. And first, we will give each one of them an opportunity to introduce themselves and to briefly describe their experiences in the context of diversity and inclusion on our medical campus. And then we will engage in what I hope will be a lively dialogue, during which we encourage everyone to make comments and ask sometimes difficult questions. Please feel free to use the chat function if you prefer. And let's begin by asking, let's begin with the medical student, which is the most important of the three. Kay Elise, can you please tell us about yourself?
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me? Wonderful. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here today. As Dr. Ortega said, my name is Kay Elise, and I have the great privilege of being the BUSM's first Diversity and Inclusion Fellow. And so this role is also a dual fellowship at the Health Systems Innovation and Policy Center as a research fellow. And so this year I'm partnering with the Diversity and Inclusion Office as well as Dr. Garg in the Medical Education Office to see how we can move forward a lot of the efforts that have begun a year ago with the Racism in Medicine VIG, and to begin to do implementation as well as looking towards the new 2022 curriculum. How can we create a broader equity curriculum? So I'm very excited to be here and to share such great space with our other very accomplished panelists. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Harris, Angelique.
Hi, how are you? I just had it on the video just because my internet was a little bit unstable there. Hi, so Angie Harris. I am the Director of Faculty Development and Diversity for the Department of Medicine and Director of Faculty Development for BU Medical Campus. And so in my role, I work with faculty to come up with ways to think about creative solutions to address issues of equity, inclusion, quite often within not only their work with patients and their work on different projects and their work with students, but also I try to help them think about ways that they can do this within their research. And we're trying to incorporate this a lot more within our various programs. We direct, again, the mid-career program, et cetera, the early career program, the URG program. But in my own actual life and personal research and work, I'm a medical sociologist by training, and a lot of what I do in terms of equity and inclusion work focuses on the ways in which marginalized communities experience health and wellness and the ways in which they work to address health issues within their own communities. And so a lot of things that I do and things that I look at are things like cultural humility, ways to have more inclusive dialogue and inclusive pedagogy and dialogue across different, and basically ways to get people to come together and think about creative solutions to address health issues. So a lot of what I do, again, here is coming up with ways to really help faculty come up with these solutions on their own, but really to come up with much more ways to think about social justice in healthcare.
Thank you, Angelique. Dr. Harris, Vonsella, Dr. Bryant.
No problem. Hi, everyone, and I am very grateful to be here also in this crowd. But I'm Dr. Vonsella Bryant. I worked in community emergency medicine outside of Boston for 13 years prior to coming over to BU School of Medicine and Boston Medical Center, where I love the motto, exceptional care without exception. And as far as my other roles, I am also the emergency medicine clerkship director, where all the medical students that work in the emergency department are under my supervision, my direction, my evaluation. But then also I'm one of the academy, a part of the academy medical educators. I'm doing doctoring courses for the first and second and third year students. And I'm also assistant dean of student affairs. So in saying all those things, just looking at the work that we are doing in the medical school as far as recruitment of more minority students. Why is that important? Well, the main reason why that is important because studies have shown that there's better health outcomes when you have a more diverse workforce. Looking at the United States population in 2019, 16% of Americans self-identify as Latino or Hispanics. Yet there's only about 6% working physicians in this country, Latino or Hispanic physicians at this time. And then as far as African Americans, 13%, according to the US Census, are identified as African American or Black. And yet there's only 5% in working physicians that identify as Black or African Americans. So I'm just so proud of some of the recruitment processes or in inclusive recruitment processes that we are doing. And actually, in my emergency medicine resident program, we recruited 5 African-American interns out of a class of 12. And sharing these best practices with other departments, I think we're gonna end up having a more diverse workforce here at BMC.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Indeed, I think that the hospital is doing its share to diversify the clinician workforce, and that's so important to recruit medical students as well. They will become future physicians. As an interesting data point, I'd like to share that, as you know, the mortality related to COVID was higher among minority groups, but here at Boston Medical Center on our medical campus, whites actually ended up having a higher mortality than Blacks and Hispanics. Is that because they were older? Perhaps. Is it because perhaps we are attuned to caring for these populations? Maybe. I throw that out there as food for thought. Gonzalo, since you're all warmed up, being the last one who spoke, let me continue with you. Tell me a little bit how all of these recent changes in the social scene and in the political scene have impacted your practice on the front lines, right? Which is the emergency room here.
Yes.
You know, anesthesia and emergency medicine took the brunt of it in recent months because of COVID. But let me hear from you.
Yeah. So again, I worked in a community hospital outside of Boston. And what attracted me to come to Boston Medical Center was that it has a diverse patient population, 70% African American and Latino, or Black and Latino, and just that whole exceptional care without exception. One of my mentors here, and I believe most of you all know who Dr. Thea James is, we want to help patients to thrive instead of just survive. And thinking of patient care in that way really inspires me to keep moving on. So Dr. James has been talking about, you know, social determinants of health. Oh, the whole hospital has been talking about that for the longest term, for the long time. But then now we're actually giving a name to it, structural racism, meaning that we are looking at people's living conditions because they couldn't afford or not able to get loans to be able to live in better neighborhoods, to be able to have access to better health care, or to have better living conditions where you have better ventilation so that you wouldn't get COVID, or that you had to work because you weren't able to work from home, or that you have higher rates of diabetes and high blood pressure and kidney disease because you live in food deserts and you didn't have healthy food choices. So we've been speaking on that for some years now. And just looking at COVID spreading, I know that you said that we saw more white patients here with severe illness at Boston Medical Center. But speaking with nurses in the intensive care unit, it seemed like the majority of those patients were African American or Latino.
No,
So
I meant
go ahead.
the mortality was higher.
Oh, gotcha,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
gotcha.
No, of
But
course.
the severity.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So just having that mission burned into us as far as we can make some differences with some of the resources that we have here at Boston Medical Center that's being passed to the medical students, and the medical students that I am involved with educating and advising. They have the spirit to like really make some positive changes in healthcare in the future.
Yeah, thank you.
For now and future to come.
And Dr. Harris, because I know that you were relatively new here on our medical campus. If I have to guess, it's been about a year.
Yep, almost a year. In November, it'll be a year.
About a year. Give me your summary 12 months later, you know, of the current landscape and what you foresee. What does your crystal ball tell you?
Crystal ball. So it's been super fascinating in the year that I've been here, almost a year. With COVID, it is making everything so much more complicated. And particularly with the election and the potential fallout concerning healthcare and things like that. So it's really hard to assess what the long-term impact this will have culturally. So if you look at the impact, for example, our continued emphasis here on anti-racism, and I know it was something that was a focus here at on this BU period. It was a focus prior to the Floyd murder, but it's something that is impacting what's happening at the hospital, what's happening with the culture of the institution. So it's really interesting seeing how these different social factors that we can't quite predict is going to have a large scale impact on the institution. So it's really hard to see what's going to happen next year because based on honestly what happened with the debates the other night. And just overall, it is, I would not have predicted this time last year that this is where we would be. So, you know, it was funny. I used to always tell people that sociology was just the great study of why does things happen. And it felt like you did have like a, you know, a magic 8-ball or a crystal ball or something. And yeah, this has completely thrown me for a loop. So it's really, who knows what's going to end up happening. But really what's really wonderful is a cultural shift that we see happening, particularly at BMC and at places where people are really trying to enact change. And so although things seems to be kind of all falling apart, on the outside, it really feels like people are working very, very, very hard to be the change that's needed and to, you know, do what's needed for the patients, for the students, for the faculty, et cetera. So that's really great to see. And I think things at BUMC is going to be great going forward. But outside, I have no idea.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Elise, can you briefly summarize what our early medical school selection program does? And at the same time, tell us, how are you folks doing there in the context of everything that is going on in the country and in medical education?
Sure, absolutely. So as Dr. Ortega references, the EMSSP, as it's known at BU, it's an early selection program that partners with HBCUs and HSIs and also Pacific Islanders serving institutions and helps provide a pathway to bring in more minority students. And so these students are able to come their junior summer and then again their senior summer and full senior year and taking BU courses and just really beginning to bridge the barrier of what makes medicine sometimes seem like an impenetrable step, because they become part of our BUSM community, they become part of a place that they feel connected and seen. And so my role as the D&I fellow is partnered with that program in some ways of doing increased data collection, program enhancement, and it's a whole new game for us of how can we create community virtually. I feel like that is everyone's like, how do you not have Zoom fatigue, but really create a place of connection, as well as how can we partner with recruiting new students to come into the program and how can we think about that. And so we've begun to tap actually on alumni and prominent faces here in the institution and people who have just spoken to both the mission of the school and of the program to help us create more meaningful connections with students. And so it's been a lot of excitement, but also as we all are sort of doing a little bit of jungle gymming of how do we remake something that has worked well in the past, but in a completely new landscape.
Thank you, thank you. Folks, let's open up the floor because I'm sure that some of you have some questions or some comments and we really welcome it. I'd like to make this as interactive as possible. And I know that we are stepping on delicate territory. Frequently, people are inhibited to speak up, but that's part of the problem. Any questions?
I'm not inhibited, so if I might, I'd like to, first of all, thank all of you for your great presentation. I have a number of questions, and let me just summarize them, and Dr. Ortega, I'll let you parcel them out to your various panelists. First of all, with the changes in the South End, with that, now this becoming really a high income area, one of my questions is, what's happened to the home medical service? I don't know if that is still there. I had some great experiences as a student on the home medical service. And if it still exists, I'd be interested in how the COVID pandemic has affected that. The second question relates to the difficulty with clinical spaces for our students with the distancing that Dean Atman mentioned. And the question here is there any possibility or opportunity for affiliating with rural hospitals around New England there? Because I know here in Georgia, as in elsewhere around the country, we've had a problem with rural hospitals surviving. So I don't know if that represents an opportunity for expanding clinical teaching opportunities there for the medical school. And my third comment is an observation. As you know, when we look at Black students in medicine, one of the things that has been noted recently is the fact that while we need more Black students, male or female, we've really had difficulty with Black males. You remember the AAMC study in 2015 that pointed out that in the year 2014, there were 25 fewer African-American male first-year medical students in the country than had existed in 1978. And so it strikes me that all three of your panelists, Dr. Ortega, you're the one male on this panel. So how are we doing in terms of Black males there at Boston University? So those are some of my questions. I'd be interested in your comments.
Sure. Well, you know, we are keenly aware of the scarcity of the Black male in medicine, including in our institution and in our medical school. But we have made great strides in creating financial support for them, and we have various scholarships. You are one of the general supporters for that. And on this occasion, we really try to concentrate on women because of the Rebecca Lee Crumpler effort that we are engaging on to make sure that they also have the support that they need to achieve their goals. Regarding the home medical service, I think I'm going to turf that maybe to Kay Elise or to Priya, because I myself, I'm a bit disconnected from it. So Kay, can you answer that? If not, Priya, perhaps?
Yes, I would actually refer to Dr. Garg since I have not started my clerkships yet. She was probably the authority there.
So all of our students still are required to do home visits on their fourth year geriatrics rotation. They still go. It was on pause for 4 months, and we changed to telehealth and phone calls during that period, but it's back in operational. They wear full PPE. They travel with the faculty. The faculty are all getting tested, just like the students, and we're sending them into homes. And it's probably one of the most valuable experiences that our students have, and they say that in their graduate surveys. So that's the home visit.
I still remember as a student, the first case of acute gout I saw as a medical student on the home medical service. And I learned so much from that interaction. I think I learned more about gout from that one episode than in the rest of my medical career.
I have a question for you, Dr. Ortega.
Sure.
It seems like what you've weaved together here today is a lot about our history as a school. First African-American woman, first Indian, first Native American person who's graduated. We have this rich history. We have the EMSSP program. And I look at the present, and there are these incredibly bright people looking at me, and I'm 100% sure, I'll tell you, my crystal ball tells me that these guys are gonna solve all of the world's problems, or at least ours at BU. And I look at the future, and I think back to what Dean Antman said about the school, the medical school recruiting Dr. Sadiqa Kendi, the main campus recruiting Dr. Ibram Kendi. And we have this fellowship that Kay Elise is doing that I think is fantastic. And I'm wondering how you are thinking about weaving this all together, bringing in more fundraising to these efforts. Data is critical. Having a way to publish the data are critical, and to have a unifying theme or umbrella is important. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are, given how much has happened right here at our own school.
My personal thoughts, or is that a question that you would like me to distribute? Because the people that come to mind are Dr. Antman and Suzanne. I mean, I could, you know, Latin Americans can speak for a long time. So I think maybe Suzanne or Dr. Antman.
I'm going to defer to the dean.
Yeah. No, you're muted. Your mic is muted, Karen. Yeah.
I think you can hear me now.
Yeah.
The faculty are probably tired of me telling them that I can't wait for them to write up some of the things that they're doing. They're doing exciting things, and we're the stealth medical center. We just actually don't get the credit. I was kind of crowing over the Dr. Garg and Dr. Kaylee's, not yet doctor, sorry, are going to be giving the plenary session at the AMC. I think our faculty are doing incredible things in the clinic, in public health. We have the Black Women's Health Study that presented to the Board of Trustees. They were really impressed by it. And we're doing all of these things, and nobody has the time to write them up, and we want our faculty and our students to be doing that. One of the students yesterday, because we have a number of things that we're working on with respect to anti-racism, and we've divided them up into things that are associated with medical education, the things that are associated with student affairs, the things that are associated with admissions. And one of the students was saying, I'm getting those papers. And I'm saying, yes, you know, because basically she's going to be more credible for residency because of her academic, the way she's looking at this. Now, having said that, our development team, and she can talk on that, Suzanne can talk about that, have been really out to get scholarships. We have probably, I think we were putting this list together. I think we have 10 or 11 scholarships that are specific for underrepresented minorities, including African-American men. I know we have at least one of those. That's like the one for Rebecca Lee Crumpler, and we thought we should have one for women because we did have one for men. But we have a number of scholarships that people have made, many recently, some people in the room, that are specific for underrepresented minorities. And I think that we just need to continue to do that. Suzanne, you want to talk? Now, I thank you very much, Reshma, because I know that you've got one of these. Yeah. You actually were absolutely key in having Kay Elise be able to do this fellowship year. It's part of that program that you're supporting through Vertex with EMSSP. So we're taking all of the resources that we have, and I'm glad that you two can meet actually if you haven't already. We're taking all the resources we have and trying to leverage them here.
That's
so,
right.
Well,
yes.
When Suzanne said what she's currently doing with respect to the scholarships.
Correct. And I would just add to say that we're doing our best to extend our reach beyond the medical school to all BU alumni. And, you know, just as an example with the Rebecca Lee Crumpler Scholarship, I want to figure out how to deliver that message to Black women physicians everywhere, because Dr. Crumpler's name resonates with all of them. So I think broadening our reach as much as possible is key, but I don't want to run out of time before we allow Dr. Clark to ask her question. She's patiently had her hand raised for a long
I
time.
want to do a shout out for Dr. Williams too, because she's been very helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Jane?
My pleasure.
Thank you.
It's actually her unnamed half that wanted to ask the question. But we're on.
Sorry about that, Jonathan. Go for it.
So I want to ask you a question. It's a problem we've actually faced in our business, a challenge we face in our business, but I think it's also germane probably to the medical experience of Advance as well. So we instituted at the beginning of this year a really major effort in our STEM-based business, which has a great amount of scientific and clinical basis for the work that we do. That our recruiting outreach, which was always to traditionally, well-regarded schools and pretty much routinely brought us either South Asian or lily white applicants and no diversity whatsoever, that we were going to try exceedingly hard to start to build the infrastructure for interns, for junior entrants, because 10 years from now, the only way you have leadership that is completely diversified, we believe, is to start to really lay the groundwork for that. The challenge we've had, and we've included historically Black colleges now in our outreach and universities, historically Black medical schools, as well as the diversity offices from the schools from which we traditionally recruited. And incidentally, we have reached out to the BU MD MBA program and reached out as well to Northeastern and its engineering program. That it has been hard for us to have in the recruiting sessions, young Black men and women come forward to express interest. And the internships where we're approached by students frequently through connections, and those connections frequently reflect the makeup of the leadership of our industry, which is the biotech and medical technology industry. And I almost have felt that there's a reluctance because there's a sense that you can't easily enter the field, and therefore we're not taken seriously in our recruiting efforts. And I'm adamant as the CEO of this to ensure that we have a diversified group, and we do already to some degree, but nowhere near what I'd like. And I actually wanted to ask the panelists, Dr. Ortega, and I'm happy to have your input as well, but your panelists, whether if in fact you face this even within the medical school in terms of reach into traditional specialties where it has been traditionally white. I was a surgeon for many years, and there were very few Black surgeons when I started, very few female surgeons. And if you have any counsel as to how to overcome what I think is inertia in part in terms of these recruitments and diversification of these types of efforts.
Sure.
Dr. Ortega, do you mind? Or go ahead, Dr. Ortega, if you have something.
I can briefly share, I can illustrate with my own personal experience currently as chair of the Department of Anesthesiology. I have one African-American woman, and we have 35 faculty members. And I have been in pursuit of the recruitment of a Black male. It is just not that easy. Take for instance KLEs, because we do have a couple of early medical school selection program pathway BU alumni in the department, but that's something that takes at least a decade, because we plug them out of college when they are rising juniors. That's 2 years. And then 4 years of medical school, and then 4 years of training. If they don't do a fellowship, if they do a fellowship, it could easily be 12 years before we can actually turn KLEs into a member of our faculty. So this is not like a sprint. It's a marathon, and it takes a lot of patience. Then you have the issue of the competing financial requirements. A lot of these students have great financial needs, right? Because of their socioeconomic and educational background or their families, right? And Boston is particularly expensive. If you would give me an unlimited budget, I could do just about whatever you want when it comes to diversity and inclusion and representation in the department. But it's very difficult, and it requires a concerted effort and a long-term strategy. I'll stop at that.
Oh, I love it. And thank you for your recruitment efforts and in the CEO world there. But yes, so it takes a team, because sometimes folks are like, Yeah, good luck with that, Dr. Bryant, with you recruiting. But no, it can't be on just one or two people in the department. It has to be like everyone, like taking diversity as a priority. And actually, there's pipeline programs here at BU School of Medicine that I'm glad to be a part of, just because you have to inspire young people early. I mean, going into medicine isn't even on the radar because of all the things that are going through a young person's life. So just inspiring to say, hey, this is something that you can be is something as far as pipeline programs and exposing them. And usually we do that with career talks, do that with like hands-on workshops and whatnot. But then recruitment, it's so important. Like, what makes the best fit? I mean, yes, we would love for everybody to have these awesome test scores. I mean, that's an easy way of filtering through who you're going to interview. But then looking at the hard work, the resiliency, their devotion to serving the patient population that we take care of, we recognize that as being more important for our recruitment process. And so, in whether they're white, Asian, everyone that we recruited this year, and even the past years, have been really serious about that, the passion for our patient population, the best healthcare. But then after they get here, we have to have a culture on campus or in the hospital about understanding implicit bias among us and also among our patients, because the studies have shown that because of our bias, sometimes Black patients, they don't get the pain management that white patients get, or even cardiovascular interventions that Black patients tend to get less catheterizations and whatnot. So we have to recognize that, and then also recognize the microaggressions, and just as far as what the students have to, a Black student come into a cafeteria, you know, what are you doing here? Do you belong here? So making sure that that student feels a belonging. But then the last part of the circle of increasing diversity is faculty retention. And it's not just because I recently became faculty here at BMC, but the first 3 years of a junior faculty, the studies have shown, the first 3 years of a junior faculty coming on board, it tells whether that faculty member is going to stay in academic medicine or leave academic medicine. And so getting that mentoring and faculty development is very key, of which that's how I discovered this beautiful family here at BMC and BU Medical School, by getting that mentorship and feeling included, feeling like I can do this. So I feel like using all those things can help that diversity snowball in different fields. And we got a lot of these papers from like the McKinsey reports. So we had to look outside of medicine to figure out how we can have more inclusive recruitment practices.
Dr. Clark, just to add to what Dr. Bryant said, something that I've found in the student role is doing a lot of, we have these diversity sort of like mixers that you can come to as an applicant. And the question that I get sort of as the quiet question is like, are they serious? It's like a culture test. And it's having someone in the room that's vision is as big as yours and as meaningful as yours to provide that one-on-one connection. And I felt like that has been something, even for when I applied to BU, being able to have those quiet conversations that are outside of the broad recruiting efforts gave legs to the vision that you are casting for your company. And so that would be the one point to attach to Dr. Bryant's of how do you create those small, meaningful connections with someone who's already there, someone who's already part of your team, that they can give validity to the mission that you're moving towards.
Thank you for that. I think it's a wonderful point. I will say that we have initiatives that range from mentoring high school students all the way through to much more advanced and more senior positions. And my question was less about the reluctance of young Black men and women to come forward because they feel that it's not available, and much more that it's our being taken seriously. I think you just hit the nail on the head, Dr. Green, in terms of what the issue is, and combating that. It's not always easy, but thank you for saying that, because I think that's a message to also bring back. I have an entire team devoted to this, but it's still, it is hard work. And they've got to stay committed to it. Thank you all for your comments. It's hugely helpful.
This has been terrific, but I do think we need to move to the next.
Thank you.
Thank you, Drs. Ortega, Bryant, and Harris, and Kay Elise. Since the pandemic began, BUSM has been engaged in robust COVID-19 research. And we are thrilled that Dr. Robert Davey is able to join us today to tell you a bit about his work. Dr. Davey is a professor of microbiology and member of the National Emerging Infectious Disease Laboratories, or NEDL. His COVID-19 research is focused on testing drug candidates for efficacy. Welcome, Dr. Davey.
Thank you, Dr. Silver. I appreciate the introduction. I thank Dr. Antman for inviting me to talk to you. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. There we go. All right, great. Hope you can all see this. So I'm going to tell you today about the work we've been doing to try and find treatments for SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 disease. This has been a big effort from my lab and many others across Boston University, as well as other institutions in Boston and further abroad. So I was recruited to Boston University Medical Center and into the NEDL at the end of 2018. Before that, I was in Texas, and I'd been introduced to working in high containment so-called BSL-4 facilities. This is the highest level of containment that you can do. And this is usually reserved for things like Ebola virus or Lassa fever virus, which kill more than 20% of people who become infected with them. Obviously, SARS-CoV-2 is not near that, but the magnitude of the problem, of course, and the pandemic has meant that, you know, people like myself have thought about how we can apply what we know to trying to help and solve the problem that's ongoing. Anyway, at BSL-4 we can work on anything. So obviously SARS-CoV-2 is not a major problem. Here is a look into what the BSL-4 suite is. It's a long corridor with many rooms off it. We are one of the largest BSL-4 facilities in the country. That's something to be proud of. It's a very well designed facility. We connect to these airlines. Here's me in my suit on the right, actually on March the 19th, when we were the first to start working with SARS-CoV-2 in the whole of Massachusetts. Here's Hiroyuki, a postdoc, holding a canister of SARS-CoV-2, us going into the lab for the first time, and wearing our biological containment suits is what we wear in the BSL-4. So what I'm very good at is I'm good at doing so-called high throughput screening of small molecules. So here is a plate with 384 little holes in it, and we have special liquid handling pipetting systems that can transfer small amounts of liquid into this plate, including viruses, cells, and things like this. And we can screen for inhibitors of virus infection. So something I'm proud of, and something that Boston University and BUMC has helped me to do, and it's very important. I mean, I want to acknowledge that support through my startup package, which I'm sure some of you contributed to, is we've developed what I call as a pharmacological testing pipeline. So if you're serious about testing small molecules or treatments for any type of disease, you really need to have an ability to screen things in the dish and then bring it to disease models such as the mouse, and then try to understand how the molecule is behaving inside the disease model. And this is just a representation of how, you know, if you gave a drug at certain times, how it increases in the blood supply, that sort of thing. BU and the NEDL has provided me an ability to do this for the first time in my life, mainly because we have something called a gamma irradiator on campus, which is a $1 million investment. But what we can do with that gamma irradiator is take something that's well infected with virus, as shown by these little red dots on top of the blue dots. The red is the virus infecting cells. For SARS-CoV-2, or over here for Ebola virus, there's other colors there, but there's red and green dots showing infection. We can gamma irradiate it and then completely sterilize it for virus. And yet the molecules that we care about, like drugs or cytokines or some sort of, you know, immune response mediators, they're all preserved, and we can send that to our collaborators and learn a lot and publish our data. Anyway, so our screening platform at high containment is relatively simple. because you have to be at high containment. But it allows us to screen tens of thousands of compounds a week. And you need that sort of throughput to get to where you need to be for finding a treatment. Because most of what you do in small molecule treatments fails. So we're always trying to skim the cream off the top. Of course, you know, the more shots you have at goal, the higher chance you are going to make a goal. Anyway, so we have these small, relatively expensive pieces of equipment, around $20,000 a piece, that can fill up plates like this in 10 seconds. And so we'll fill up the plate with a drug, wait a little while, drop in the virus on top of the cells, wait 36 hours or so, and then stain it with an antibody that can be used to detect the virus. And then we image it with high throughput imaging systems like the Citation. And one of these was actually donated to us by biotech in the early phases of the pandemic, which is a great thing for us. We have nice robotic systems to allow these things to run basically unattended. And the types of, I just wanted to give you an idea of the types of things we get. So each one of these little dots here is actually a drug that we've tested. And what we're looking at here is on the y-axis, how well infected you are, shown by the green, all right? Each blue thing here is actually one cell, all right, on this image. So more infected you are, the more green you are. And so there are a lot of things, obviously, that fail, like I said before. But every now and then you find sort of, you know, something that works very well. And that's represented maybe by this dot. So not well infected, but the cell number is still good. It's still healthy cells. And you can see there's much less green. And that's essentially what we do. We pick through photographs. We take hundreds of, you know, holiday snaps. And then we go through and get rid of all the boring ones. And we try to focus on the exciting pictures of what we like to see, which is like this. The other boring one is when maybe your drug that you're testing is actually pretty toxic and it kills all the cells. So there's not many cells left in the well. And that's shown by this. All right. So, so we really have been extremely, we've benefited greatly from an outpouring of well, need and interest in the needle through the pandemic. And this has been quite a great experience for everybody who's been working on this in the needle, including myself. So one of the things we've been doing, the largest thing we've done is actually a screen of 6,800 molecules that are a part of the Broad Drug Repurposing Hub. So these are FDA approved molecules that are already out there in the clinic being used for other things. And the idea is that if you find a small molecule that works against SARS-CoV-2, just happens to work, the difficult stuff like a phase 1 clinical trial has already been done. So you can rapidly advance that treatment to the clinic and get through to maybe a phase 3 trial. So this is a combined effort between ourselves, Broad and Harvard Medical School and Northeastern University, where they've been doing computational analysis of this thing. There are many other contributors to what we've been doing. So John Porco is a great chemist at BU. He has a very nice library of 3,200 molecules that look like this. We've been testing those, and there are some good things in there. Joe and Scalzo and Lazo Barabasi at Northeastern, they do computational analysis, and they've given us what they think are going to work, and some of them do indeed work. Ari Althanari, he's been doing the largest, he's actually using the Google computational system. They've given him a slice of their CPUs, and he's actually doing computer docking of small molecules to viral proteins. This is, you know, a huge effort. And there are other contributors that have given us their small molecules with their bent. We've also been working with a lot of industry partners, including Cleve, Moderna, and lately GSK, who are getting us to screen their libraries. Okay. Just a quick summary for those who care about what's coming out of the Broad Institute. We're going to get this to publication soon. So 6,800 molecules were screened, FDA approved, and you can actually see what the virus cares about. So the virus cares about heat shock proteins, BET proteins. These are all to do with, you know, how the cell functions normally, but if you upset these, because the virus is a parasite on the cell, if you upset some of the functions, normal functions of the cell, you can really destroy virus infection. And the really nice thing about this, what we've done is we've actually found some treatments that are operating in the sort of the happy zone of pharmacologicals, around, you know, 10 nanomolar, which is really where you want to be if you're really serious about getting anything to the clinic. And there's 6 of these in this class. So this is quite exciting, and we're really looking forward to see how these perform in later work. Okay, so just to summarize, so we've established this high throughput screening system at the needle. We can actually use it now for any virus type. As a student in my lab, Kelly Donahue, she's been able to adapt or move away from using antibodies to using nucleotide probes. And now you can, from a sequence, which we had very early on in the pandemic, you can get to a screen in maybe a week instead of waiting for 3 or 4 months for an antibody to be made. We've made great connections with the pharmacology community, particularly on the East Coast. And I'm looking forward to seeing those strengthen over time, particularly with our academic partners across Boston, Harvard Medical School, MIT, all these other things, other places that, it's just great to be at BU because we have this facility, and to be honest, they don't. Anyway, so we're also developing these great relationships with people at BU that I think is a great thing for inter-university collaboration. We're getting money from Mass CPR, which is also, of course, important to make this stuff work. And we're further developing systems, which I didn't talk today about, trying to take leads from the bench to the clinic, bridging gaps, particularly, the cells that we use are sort of, they're cancer cells. Maybe that's not the best choice for a screen. We need to move more towards primary cell types. And a collaborator, Deborah Anderson at BU, and myself have been using these multi-layered primary cell systems that they look like, upper airway surfaces, as well as deeper in the lung, and things like intestine, because the SARS-CoV-2 does infect the intestine as well. Here's an image of one of these actually infected with SARS-CoV-2, shown by the green. And of course, we're doing evaluation of leads in animal disease models, which is occurring this week and next week. So that's quite exciting. Of course, I have needs, like everybody. So, we've screened 20,000 molecules over the period of 4 months, which, sounds like a lot, but in the larger, realm of screening small molecules for the pharmaceutical industry, it's really quite a small number. I mean, we really need to get to maybe 10 times this. And, we have reasonable robotics, but better robotics would make this more efficient. And the other thing I always like to, point out, it's not really the machines that make all this work. It's really the brains. And BU, I'm enjoying being at BU because it has a strong recruitment process for getting great students to come in. And this has been very enjoyable to be involved with. And we need to keep doing that well. And as you talked about before, having diversity in that population is very important. Coming from where I was, Texas, it's quite interesting because the Hispanic minority really there is actually a majority. So we had reasonable diversity, and it was good to learn how and what the Hispanic student was really looking at. And it's interesting. It's an eye opener for somebody like myself who's white to understand what are the motivations for those types of students to come to your lab, and they're different, and we need to address that. Anyway, so it's a long-term investment like we talked about before, and I think we're definitely doing the right thing at BU. Okay, so I'll end there, and happy to take any questions if you have them.
You can go ahead and unshare your presentation, Dr. Davey, and then we can see everyone.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
There we go. That's better.
I have a question. Can you tell me Are any of the substances that you have tested thus far shown promise for future possibilities for therapy for COVID?
Yeah, actually, so the six, the high affinity interactors, so the high potency interactors that I was talking about before, we are putting those into mice this week and next week as a disease model. So if we get something from that, we are very excited about it. At the moment, they're in the right potency range, so that they're very, very promising at the moment leads. We just need to verify they work in the animal disease model, and then we can further promote them to maybe a clinical trial.
And is there anything about these substances that you could describe what their characteristics are?
Yes, right. So they're not what I call ideal. Actually, one of them is actually a cardiac glycoside, but the important thing is they're working well below their toxic levels, and so they're disrupting something the virus cares very much about. And as with all these things, it's usually not what you think it is. It's not the original prescribed reason that the drug was put on the market. It's something else, subtly different, that the virus cares greatly about, and you're perturbing that. And finding that how that's working is actually the most interesting thing for me. But yeah, they're within the realm of things that could work, and unusual mechanisms. Another one is protein synthesis inhibition, but very specific types of inhibition of that. Again, viruses, care more about a certain type of protein synthesis over other types of things. So tweaking it's like you're tweaking the system. You're sort of poking at its side. I mean, the cell doesn't care too much, but the virus certainly does.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davey. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
As I mentioned at the last meeting, beginning with our next DAB meeting in the spring, that Dr. Donald Kaplan, a graduate of the BUSM class of 1973, will assume the role of board chair. Dr. Kaplan has been a member of our board since 2017, and he brings a great experience from years of service as a trustee for the Boston Museum of Science. Dr. Kaplan served as chief of medicine at Cambridge Health Alliance. He's also on faculty at Harvard and Tufts University Medical Schools. And we're thrilled that Dr. Kaplan will be serving as the board chair. And it's been my great honor to serve as the board chair since 2016. And I'm pleased to virtually hand off the gavel to Dr. Kaplan. And I know the board's in good hands with his leadership, and I look forward to remaining as a board member moving forward. And thank you to everyone for joining us for this meeting and your great questions and engagement. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Dean Antman or the BUSM development team if you have any additional questions, or if we can be of any assistance to you. They're always here as a resource for you. And with that, it concludes our meeting. And thank you again, and please be safe and stay well.
Lee, I think Dr. Kaplan might have a couple of words to say. And thank you so much, Lee, for your years of service.
Well, I echo that entirely. Dr. Stoler's been a member of the board since 2009, and he's been the chair since 2016, and has done a wonderful job of bringing some maturity to the function of the board in terms of our ability to be a strong advocate for the policies and the importance of both the academic and the social aspects of the medical school. And I hope you'll all join me in the future to continue this work, which is really more valuable than ever, given the affairs of the world at this point and the challenges that BU and all medical schools and all medical education has to confront in the future. So I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Dr. Antman?
I just wanted to thank Dr. Silver as well for taking the time to be our chair for these many years. You've done a terrific job, and we look forward to not only having you at future meetings, but hearing how your sons are doing as alums.
Thank you.
And we hope to see many of you at 7 o'clock tonight for our virtual scholarship event. We'll have to raise a virtual glass at the time.
Good.
Hopefully everybody will be back in person by next year.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.